Hey there, my name is ZW Buckley. I'm a composer, music producer, and Ableton certified trainer, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are talking about Ableton's Phaser-Flanger, which is easily probably the audio effect that I've slept on most. And so today I want to show you 3 different applications of Phaser-Flanger and show you that it is so underrated. So if you aren't using it in your work, then you'll be clued in and you can start using it yourself. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So let me play for you this beat that I've started. Now, let me quickly go through and turn on all 3 Phaser-Flanger examples that we're going to be going over today in this video. And just listen to how much more vibe this whole thing has. It has a distinctly stronger sense of texture to it. So let's look at each of these examples and what they're bringing to the overall feeling of this beat. And let's actually start with this kalimba track here at the beginning. So I'm using Phaser-Flanger in its phaser mode here. And let's listen to this part solo. And let's hear it without Phaser-Flanger now. We can hear it's adding a whole ton of width and a whole ton of texture. How is it doing that? Well, I think the easiest way for us to break down what's going on here is to just rebuild what we've got going on here from scratch. So I'm going to grab Phaser-Flanger. And let's go ahead and put it right next to this other one. But we're going to bring the wet dry on this one all the way down to 0. So it's not processing the sound at all. So a phaser works by creating a duplicate of the signal, adding these notch filters, and then combining it back together. That's a very high, quick level overview, but enough to help us get down and dirty with this. And so we can increase the number of those filter notches. And so I like to crank it all the way up to, in the upper 30s. We can go up to 42, but let's listen to how the various number of notches actually affects the sound. And so when we increase these notches, the effect becomes really pronounced. And so let's bring it back down to the 32 that we have on this one here. And we can set the center frequency for the notches. Let's actually bring the LFO all the way down. And this is going to help us better understand how this center frequency really affects the sound. But where the effect really pops and comes alive, funny enough, is when I am just manually moving this. This is where the LFO matters. It's why it's so important. So let's bring the LFO to the 60% that we have it here. And the spread now is going to be the spacing between these individual notches. We can go really, really wide with them or very, very narrow. It's the intensity or the breathing room that we have here. So let's bring it to the 20 that we have, and let's just bring up the blend. Awesome. Okay, now the feedback is how much we're going to reintroduce this notched signal onto itself. And if you crank it up to 100, we're going to go right to outer space. So we'll leave it at 20%. It has this very useful feature to flip the phase of the feedback to help kind of cancel out some of the most assertive phase cancellation that might occur with this, which is kind of funny because a phaser literally exists for the purpose of creating partial phase cancellation, but we're going to toggle that on. Now, the warmth adds a little bit of distortion, and so we can bring that in as well. And we can really hear by about the time we get up to 30 or 40%, we start to hear that saturation really start to creep into the signal and distort it. If we really crank it, we get that fuzziness to it, which feels more kind of like tape saturation to me than, a just straight up full distortion. But the magic really then is the LFO. And you might totally miss the LFO on Phaser-Flanger if you don't hit this knob and expand it. And Phaser-Flanger actually has two LFOs. Your second one here is just a dedicated sine wave LFO, but this first one has multiple different wave shapes to choose from and a whole bunch of controls to help dictate how that motion occurs. And so let's leave it to triangle, but I'm a really huge fan of spin, which just kind of forces the two sides of the LFO, it's a stereo LFO, to be, out of shape with one another, for lack of a better word. One is always chasing the other, but we can't get them to perfectly line up. And that's really the fun of spin. So we've got it at 24 on this other one. Let's bring it over to that. And then let's affect the duty cycle, which, really is just affecting the shape of the waveform, how quickly we're moving through each side of the LFO and what kind of extreme adjustments are we moving there. And it looks like we've got it at 58. Awesome. And we'll use a little bit of the envelope follower, 0.48. That feels very specific. Add a little bit more attack. And then let's bring in a little bit of this steady, constant second LFO. And we'll switch to Hertz for this one. Bring it to 0.1. And let's also go and adjust the rate for our first LFO here and bring that to 0.33. And again, this is where we started. The amount of texture that it adds to the sound is so good. It's so good. I love it so much. Now let's look at our second example, which I think you might find to be a bit surprising, is the drums. And for this, we're using the flanger mode. And it really makes the drums pop off. Here are the drums without this Phaser-Flanger setup. It's a pretty great, awesome sound all on its own, but listen to what Phaser-Flanger adds to the sound. Let's go ahead and, again, rebuild this one back up from scratch. We'll bring the wet dry down to 0 so we can understand what's going on here. Let's do the easy thing and switch over to flanger mode. Now, this time factor is important on a flanger because a flanger works by taking the signal, duplicating it, and then delaying it slightly. And that delay time is modulated. That modulation creates comb filtering, and that's the classic jet engine sound that we think of when we think of flanging. And to demonstrate really classic flanging, let's go ahead and expand the LFO and bring the phase all the way down to 0. And we're going to bring the feedback up to 50%. And as I play with this time, we're going to hear that the comb filtering changes based off of this kind of center time value that we give to the delayed signal. And that sound is comb filtering. We're really still doing that here with this sound, but we're doing it in a very particular fashion. So let's bring the time all the way up to 20, the amount to 100, exactly as we had it. Now let's switch the rate over of the LFO to hertz, and we're cranking it up really, really fast. And then to just wrap up our tweaks in this main portion of Phaser-Flanger, I'm going to bring the feedback up just a little bit further to 52%, and I'm going to invert the phase. And then now let's get our LFOs set up really quickly here. We're going to go to the random sample and hold. We'll bring the phase up to 180. And then looking at LFO2, we're going to bring the mix up to 20%. And we're going to go ahead and bring it up to 12.5 hertz rate. And here's where we're at with that. Great, we're getting closer to that sound. But what I want to spend a moment or two on is everything below these LFOs, mainly the envelope follower and then this safe bass control. So drums are, they're punchy by nature, right? We just really have an instantaneous transient and then a decay. And so an envelope follower is really useful for this type of sound. So let's crank it all the way up to 1. And let's play with the attack and the release and listen to how this affects the sound. And it's really when we move very, very quickly with a lightning fast attack and release that we start to get this erosion kind of like quality to it that I think is really nice and really neat. Now, this other feature here, Safe Bass, we can think about it as a filter that essentially helps to reduce the effect of Phaser-Flanger on anything below this cutoff value. Now, for the drums, really like to crank this up. So I'm going to bring this up to 1500 hertz or 1.5 kilohertz. So that way we're really just kind of catching the top of the snare and, our cymbals. But let me sweep it so we can hear what it's doing. Now here, when we pretty much take out safe bass entirely by bringing it down to 5 hertz, the kick is completely eviscerated and the snare is just over the top. It sounds like strange FM noise, which could be really cool, but in this application, it's not what I'm looking for. Let's do the inversion and bring up safe bass and hear how we get that clarity back with our kick and our snare. A super useful control. If you're playing with Phaser-Flanger and you just feel like everything is getting destroyed, play around with safe bass. And then the final thing is we're going to just really warm this sound up. Now, what I like about this warmth control, and again, to iterate the point that I made earlier about it feeling like tape emulation, is that it really smooths out the top end and just warms up the mid-range. Listen again for the higher frequencies when I do this. It sounds like a really nice low-pass filter, which is just awesome. Now, for the final example, let's move over here to this vocal group and let's talk about what we've got going on here with the doubler, which is the final mode of Phaser-Flanger. So here's the vocal sound just on its own. Now this is really adding our stereo width to the sound. Let me A/B it on and off. And I find this doubler setup so useful for, of course, creating doubles in the traditional sense for a lead vocal, but something like this where the vocal is really meant to be more of a texture and in the background, the doubler helps to really expand our sense of the stereo field. And as a result, then kind of dilute the vocal a little bit in the background, which can be very useful for some things. So again, let's just rebuild this from scratch. So we'll grab Phaser-Flanger, bring this one all the way down to 0 on the wet dry. And let's switch over to doubler mode. Now this doubler works by duplicating the signal and then delaying it by a set amount of time. We can go as little as 20 or as high as 150 milliseconds. So as I, bring the time down to 20 milliseconds, the doubling effect is less pronounced. But listen, as I bring it up, the doubling effect is going to become far more pronounced. Notice how in the end there, when I brought the amount down to 0, it really just, especially at this maxed 150 milliseconds, just kind of sounded like a very quick slapback delay. So we can create more static doubling, but we start to then just get into delay territory at that point, because it is the modulation of the delays, even subtly, that helps to create this doubling that we want. Now, subtle might be something that you use for a lead vocal double, but again, we want to go textural here. So let's speed up the rate to just a single measure, and let's crank this amount. And then we'll go to 9.1 as I have prescribed here, though 50 would likely be fine. Let's hear that. It's pretty intense. Let's add a little bit of feedback to make it even more intense. And let's invert that phase. Now let's go to the expanded view of the device, because it's how we use and manipulate these LFOs that are going to turn this into something that isn't so nauseating. Let's switch to our random waveform, and it consistently and steadily moves from one point to the next. So that can result in a bit of a slower motion, which is very helpful when we think about how intense the constancy of the triangle was. Now let's set up LFO2, 25% mix, and that's really just everything that we've got going on here. With that, we'll bring the warmth up to 36. So the Phaser-Flanger can be so useful for making things sound lush, especially things that maybe need to sit farther back in the mix, like these vocals. Let's bring them back to where I had them in the stereo field, and let's listen to everything all together once more. What did I tell you? Phaser-Flanger, so underrated, such a cool device. I hope you start making awesome music with it and that it adds a lot of richness and texture to your own work. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. I'm working really hard to try to grow this channel to 50,000 subscribers by the end of 2026, showing up with a new video every single week. And it is your support entirely that makes it possible. And if you want to take a step further in helping to sustain the channel, consider joining my Patreon. I've got a whole bunch of bonus videos and a ton of presets there for you, and more on the way every single month. Again, thank you so much for watching. Until next time.